Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're fortunate to have with us the new Vice President of the New York State Nurses Association. She's been a long-time union activist. She's led the bargaining team for her local Montefiore Hospital. She's got a lot of notoriety in the New York City newspapers for their helping the nurses in New York City, the major hospitals in New York City, gain one of the most effective contracts that they've had in their history. And in doing so, there may be lessons in there for people here from CSEA and PEF that just went through a very concession-oriented contract. Well, they had a lot of their success by doing organizing before negotiations began and while negotiations were going, before they had a tentative agreement. And that's something that we may have to learn and try to role model in the future we get into contract negotiations. Judith, unlike a lot of other union organizers and union leaders, is not paid full-time. She's working full-time and a vice president of the New York State Nursing Association. And their delegates, the conventions, they got to pay for their own time, use their own time and pay for their own travel expenses to go there. So the nurses and the union organizers that are involved in the New York State Nurses Association are real union activists and committed people. And I know from an old friend of ours in the Public Employees Federation, Bernie Mulligan, who was the field rep for PEF-NCON back in the early days when I got involved, and then later on became an assistant to the president before PEF, before he went on to become an assistant to the president for the Teamsters dissident, Frank Carey. He knows Judith quite well because he came out of his retirement to work on the NYSNA staff. And Bernie says that he was very impressed with Judith because she's also in charge, works in the emergency room, the ecology unit at Montefiore Hospital. She's involved and works in intensive care, neurosurgery, and pediatrics. And as Bernie walked around the hospital with her, he was impressed by the real affection a lot of the rank and file nurses have for Judith. Now, we know about a lot of her political courage and union courage, but Mike Keenan, John Flanders, and I, and I'm trying to see, where's Andy Coates? Andy Coates attended the National Conference for Single Payer. And Judith was down there because she's involved in one of the leading organizers for single payer in New York City. But while we're at that conference in Washington, Judith and some of her other fellow nurses from Montefiore Hospital just got back from Haiti. And they were some of the first nurses to go to Haiti right after the earthquake. And they worked in horrible conditions. In the middle of storms, they only had lights in these tents with little electric cords holding the lights up, and they're doing operational surgery where there are body parts underneath the carts, and there's rats going over the patients at night, and the family members of the patients had to stay there sleeping on the cots to help to care for their sick ones or injured people. So will you please join me in welcoming Judith Sheridan Gonzalez and talk about her experiences and what she's just done with transforming her union, NYSNA.
Thank you. I didn't know you were going to bring up Haiti. You left out my childhood.
Well, wait a minute.
I'm really honored to be here and very humbled by that announcement. I actually work in the emergency department at Montefiore Medical Center. I've been there for about 28 years. Can you hear me? Is this working?
Yeah.
Huh?
A little louder.
A little louder? Is this better?
Yes.
It's higher. Okay? I'm just kind of blown away by this introduction. I'm sorry. We have really accomplished a lot in the last year. Actually, it's been, but don't think it just as a year struggle. I've been active in NYSNA for 32 years as part of a dissident caucus when I first joined 32 years ago, and I've been a member of several caucuses. And I think that's the big lesson. If you really want to get something done, you have to know that you're in it for the long haul. And that your victories are going to be minuscule, sometimes big, but you have to keep fighting and not give up. And that's what we did. So we're very excited. We have a very strange structure to our union. Our union is a professional association and a union. but originally a professional association. So the structure of the union made it impossible, virtually impossible, to get things done that we needed done, because the union was taken to court by North Shore Medical Center in 1985, and the National Labor Relations Board judged that the union was basically functioning illegally because we had statutory supervisors serving on the board of directors. So what the union should have done then was to remove the statutory supervisors from the board. Instead, it created something called insulation, which created a wall around the leadership of the union. The board of directors, which ran the union, and the Department of Labor. People know about the Department of Labor and National Labor Relations Board here, right? They're different. So the Department of Labor's understanding was that the board of directors was president, vice president, leadership of the union, while those people could never discuss union issues. So the union created something called the Delegate Assembly, which was an advisory body. So the Delegate Assembly was elected statewide to discuss union issues, but had absolutely no authority. The board of directors, which actually ran the union, did the budget, was the leadership of the union, could never discuss union issues because of this thing called insulation. So who made decisions for the union? The staff, the non-elected management staff, who basically functioned, unbridled. And at one point, somebody came into that position who was a very corrupt person, and we ended up having just a whole nightmare of a union. So, it's hard to understand. A lot of people can't believe that that's the structure we function under, and the members didn't even know until we ran our last campaign. I think it's very important to understand the stuff that was going on in our union in the context of what's going on with globalization that everybody's aware of, and the conditions under which nurses were working. Well, the union structure was really dysfunctional for so long when things were kind of in the golden years, when nurses were making more money, not working in a really repressive environment. People kind of didn't mind. They paid their dues. Maybe they held their nose while they did it, but they accepted the fact that not much was going on in the union, because what they expected and what a lot of people want is to get the services that they get, which is, better contracts, benefits, and so forth. And the environment was not so repressive about 15, 20 years ago, because healthcare was rising, we had fee-for-service and all the kind of conditions that allowed us to get the things that we wanted. If we had good negotiations, had a couple of pickets, maybe a few strikes. There were ups and downs. Sometimes we had strikes, sometimes we had wildcat kind of sick-outs and other kind of events that got us what we needed, but it was never as brutal as it is now, all across the board. So the conditions that we are all working under now has created really horrible times for unions, but really horrible times for corrupt unions, because it really exposes how bankrupt they are. And it makes the members wonder, on the one hand, you have this whole ideological anti-union sentiment coming out. If you ever read any of the right-wing publications or look at Fox or something like that, you see, why do we need unions? And a lot of the members are saying it too, because they don't see really anything happening. So you're not going to survive if you don't have a democratic union that really captures the heart and the soul and the minds of the members, and that's what we've always been trying to do. Also in New York State now, where we have a Democratic governor who looks like a Republican, the way that he functions, I always wonder what his father's thinking. We're in a real crisis, all of us. If you can beat back some concessions, you're supposed to be a progressive union. Where have we come as unions that when you beat back concessions a little bit, you're a hero? What's wrong with us? Well, nurses are in a really unique position. We can't be. Our hospitals don't move to China. People get sick here. They have to be taken care of here. They can't replace us with robots. They have tried to do that, and it really didn't work. There have been nurse robots, but I think they electrocuted somebody once by mistake. So they got rid of those. And we're in a rising industry. It's a big industry. Makes a lot of money. I think it's 20% almost of the gross domestic product. And we're a group of professional people who's skilled, hard to replace, and there's a shortage. Who is in a better position to win stuff than us? We're very strategic in the hospital industry. Hospitals can't run without nurses. We're the largest single workforce in any tertiary facility. So we have this great power potential, but where are the unions that are going to help us make that happen? So back to where the union was. Our union, our professional association, was controlled by two cliques. One was a group of what we called the old guard, many of them older, people who were administrators, educators, people who were what we call advanced practice nurses with advanced degrees, who were interested in advancing the profession but really were not in the trenches. People in the trenches, the staff nurses, which made up like 98% of our membership, really didn't have a very big voice in the organization. And a lot of the structures of the organization never embraced and never included the union members, except in these very, in my opinion, very superficial bodies where they had no power, they'd kind of vent off steam. The union, the other clique in the union that was in control was this kind of evil group of people who were pro-union. They were unionists, but they were incredibly corrupt. And they were able to manipulate a lot of the members, the union members, to follow a particular program that basically demonized this sort of democratic dissident slate that I was a part of and that many people were a part of in a variety of ways. And they really did commit very dastardly deeds. We were demonized to the extent that I know that I personally had my email hacked, and I learned about something called spoofing. Does anybody know what spoofing is? Spoofing, you ever get an email from Citibank and it tells you to give them your social security? So what they did was they were able to do that with my email address and send emails from me to members all across the state that were not from me. So that generated a lot of animosity toward these horrible emails I was sending to people that they told me about that I said I never sent. I mean, these are the kinds of things these people did to really, demonize us. That was just one example. As we became more powerful, we won some seats. We had about maybe 3 years where we started accumulating seats on the board. The last time that when I was on the board, maybe 4 years ago, we were all there was a movement to ban us. So what they did is they trumped up charges against us and tried to discipline us. We had to get a lawyer and respond, and they had to drop all charges because we had our freedom of speech rights. We spoke, we disagreed with the things the organization were doing. And then they unilaterally threw 3 of us off all board structures. So we had to sue the organization. So then there was a demonization campaign against us because we sued the organization, so people didn't know they had the right to sue the organization, and we were able to educate all the members about what their union rights were, to disagree, freedom of speech, to be able to sue the organization, and all the things that are in the Union Bill of Rights, which were never posted on the website as they should have been. Our lawsuit ended. We settled the lawsuit with 4 demands. This was about 4 years ago, that they post the Union Bill of Rights, that our caucus have the right to print a 400-word article in the newspaper that would not be censored by them, and that we had a forum at one of the conventions where we would get to have speakers from both sides have a debate. We were treated very brutally at that convention with people lining up at the mics to attack us, but we kept on we took a lot of abuse. I tried to speak sometimes and people would shout me down. It was very difficult. If you can imagine, angels of mercy shouting and screaming and blocking your way. I was physically assaulted at one point, and nothing was done about it by a 250-pound, 6'2" nurse who they used as a kind of tool against us, who later accused a 5-foot-tall, 120-pound nurse of assaulting her. I mean, the things that went on were really disgusting. But we kept on. We took it. We spent a lot of our own money, raised our own money, filing whatever legal means we could to win our rights, being hated by a lot of people who didn't know us. So what happened? Things got really rough. People's contracts started to look really bad, and our benefits, there was a crisis in our benefits and pension fund, so members got upset. They started really hating the union. I mean, really hating the union. And I worked in one of the big 4 hospitals in New York City. If people are familiar with the medical empires in New York City, I work in Montefiore. We have Mount Sinai, Columbia Presbyterian, St. Luke's Roosevelt, and Montefiore were considered the big 4 hospitals. We were still not in the leadership of the union. Our contracts had expired over a year, and we had no recourse. We were getting nowhere. We had the benefits, the pension fund had a 2-tier system that was available for the first time in the history of the organization, and the benefits fund now we faced paying $5,000 out of pocket where we paid nothing before, and this was across the board. So we were really in trouble. So what we did, our caucus was alive. We were going to still run candidates, but it wasn't just about running candidates. We had to run campaigns. So what we did is we met secretly, leaders of the big 4 hospitals, and tried to see if we could coordinate a series of strikes or job actions where we would put pressure on this empire, because we knew that when they have a nurses strike, they have to import scabs from other parts of the country. You can maybe get 1,000, 2,000. You can't get 10,000. So we made up about 10,000 nurses. So we started to develop this campaign to have strike votes around the same time. Meanwhile, there was an election going on in the union, and we had a very strong campaign. We have all these materials. We put out a lot of literature. We sold buttons. We raised thousands of dollars to run our campaign, and we circulated all the hospitals. We handed out leaflets. We had our bases. We had our people. We organized people. People were really mad at the union, and we connected ourselves to saying we're gonna do something about these contracts. We're gonna do something about the lack of democracy and the corruption in the organization. So people were really motivated by that, and we in fact won the election. But they didn't seat us. They refused to seat us. They instigated 130 election complaints against us, and when we should have been seated at convention, they refused to do so and continued with the attacks. Some of them were brutal. We tried our best, again, facing all this kind of, all kinds of name calling and cat calling, and eventually we went to court, and a judge was so outraged by the opposition that I don't know why he didn't get kicked off the bench because of the comments he made to the opposition, but he said, "You think this is Alice in Wonderland? What are you doing? I can't believe it. You think you're cute." When you look at the court transcript, you can't believe the things he's saying, because the things that they did were so outrageous. So we eventually got seated. When we got seated, we were very concerned that they wouldn't really allow us to take control of the organization. So we kind of sort of stormed the Bastille. One day, during the snowstorm on Halloween, we had a plan where those who became the board majority went to the two main offices, and we walked in and we said, we're taking over now. And we did. Because they were in contempt of court. They weren't going to actually seat us when the judge ruled that they had to. And then it was only when the judge ruled that they were in contempt of court, and each one of the board members who was blocking us would have to pay $5,000 out of pocket every day that we weren't seated, that we're going to concede. But even so, we were afraid they would change the locks and not let us in, so we had this sort of surprise entry. And then the staff was really concerned because they didn't, the rumor that we got elected, we were going to fire everybody and burn the building down or whatever. And of course, we didn't do that. There were some people who were terminated we did remove the executive director. She had, at a last-minute ditch attempt, she didn't fire. She retired two of the corrupt leaders like 3 days before the convention. But, I guess last minute tried to save herself. But we terminated her as a board, and we hired somebody who was really good, and that person in turn terminated several people who were known to be corrupt, and saved the organization an incredible amount of money out of their salaries. And then we continued with our campaign. And 6 weeks after we were elected, we successfully negotiated 4 really good contracts of the Big Four because we had strike votes. But what the opposition did, which was their mistake and really played into our strength, was they started circulating this really negative propaganda against us after we got seated, that we were, just horrible people who were going to destroy the organization. I brought some of that stuff. That's this stuff here. So, yeah, you can have some of them. Okay. Not this one. This is some of them, you can sort of see. They put a wanted poster with my picture on it in my hospital. They mailed this to every member at my hospital. And they spelled Monty wrong, so everyone knew it didn't come from inside. I mean, when you're going to do something, you should at least do your homework, right? So the nurses thought it came from management, but actually, it came from our opposition. This is the only one I have. Others are black and white. So they in my hospital, they identified some of us as the people that were real problems, so they had to eliminate us. So stupidly, just like management is stupid, they launched these attacks against us. So they mailed to my members 4 letters, which must have cost a lot of money, in the middle of strike activity, strike voting, pickets, to make the members kind of hate us, right? But what they did was they didn't realize that the members really loved us because we had our base. I had been there for 28 years, and there probably wasn't a member who I hadn't helped in some way or another, and they were furious. And I had people who came up to me when they got these things in the mail. They said, I don't agree with you. Sometimes you're really off the wall, but you tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it because this is disgusting. So, even our moderate up, everybody supported us, and they really linked the union opposition with management, and it really coalesced my entire bargaining unit. We had a strike vote with 94% of the entire membership voting to strike. Wow. 94% of the entire membership of 2,600 nurses, 400 of whom were per diems, came in and voted on site, outside, in the cold, because they wouldn't let them vote inside, standing outside in shirt sleeves to vote to strike. It really scared the hospital. So their demands, which were over here, moved really over very quickly, but not close enough. So we kind of handed them the notice, because in hospitals you have to hand a notice. 3 days after we handed the notice, we had a settlement, and that kind of happened in the other 4 places. So we were able to, no cost for benefits, keep the pension, and we pushed them. We said we needed better staffing. We wanted to improve our numbers. They said they'd hire 15 nurses. They ended up agreeing to hire 125 nurses. Wow. So we now have 125 more nurses. It was a victory. I mean, it was a victory, but let's put everything in relative terms. It wasn't a great victory because there were some things we didn't get, and I don't really consider it a great victory just to stop concessions. I think that's a big mistake that we make, to think that that's a victory. It means that you did something, and I think we have to have a really different headset about how we deal with administration. The other thing that you saw here, they passed around this thing about a strike would benefit me after people took a strike vote. I mean, how stupid can you be? And then they did these series of videos that were really disgusting that people had a problem with. But my point is, we won the election. Now there's another election coming up. I'm running again. Actually, I'm not newly vice president. I was vice president. I didn't run the last time. In fact, the people were so suspicious of NYSNA. We did these. Did a lot of work. We made these postcards. We made these really cute postcards with pictures and our platform, and we sent these out. But since I wasn't running, the nurses in my hospital thought this was a trick from NYSNA, because we didn't, we had the name of our slate. So then I had to stand in front of the hospital and hand out a letter from me saying, yes, I support the slate. They thought it was, I wasn't, because, people don't understand. They didn't realize I wasn't running. So, so we had to, we realized that in every hospital, in every facility, people know you, the local leader. They really aren't connected to the bigger picture. I mean, you really have to make that connection. And, you have to try a lot of different things. Like at one of the conventions, in order to defend who we were, we printed this nice, Q&A thing that we handed out. But then we also had the short form. Some people read, some people don't. You have to try different things. So we tried everything. We handed out, the long version, pamphlets. We all made this ourselves, by the way. We did all this stuff ourselves. With technology now, it's so much easier. But, you have to know that in different places and at different times what works and what doesn't work. Like I found out handing out something about voting, change a shift. When people are coming in, when people are coming out. Having a conversation, you have to make rounds. You have to talk. I mean, you can do emails. What I did was I discovered that a lot of people responded to emails. So what I did is I started collecting email addresses maybe 10 years ago when we had a struggle. I now have 1,600 nurses on email. I have a disclaimer. It's my email to the nurses. And I pass around something and I say, if you want to be on my list, sign up here. So people volunteer to be on so I can say what I want. And I say, I can say what I want as long as you volunteer to be on my list and you can opt out. And if you want to hear what I have to say, sign here. So that's how I send out a lot of information. But email's not enough. Phone calls are not enough. We found text messaging to be really useful to the young people. So we learned how to do groups. I had my kids show me how to do that. And we would send out text messages. Some people won't respond to anything but text messages. Anyone who has a teenager knows that. So we did that. But really it's the one-on-one conversation. That's the old-fashioned one-on-one conversation that really works. Getting to know people, finding out what matters to them, knowing that when you make your rounds, you're not going to be able to just walk to a floor and give a message. You're going to have to hear people's problems and really try to figure out what to help people with their problems. And that's why we have so much support. So what we did when we won the election we were able to generate, wins in these campaigns and start organizing members. And then we knew we had to tackle the bylaws, which prohibited us from actually interacting directly with the members. So we had this massive membership meeting. We used to have maybe 200, 300 people come to a meeting. And our membership meetings where decisions get made are whoever shows up. They're usually 3 or 4 day affairs in some resort where a lot of people can't afford to go. So who goes? People with the money, people with ability to get away, a lot of retirees, not a lot of staff nurses. So we had a one-day event in New York City where about 70% of our membership lived. We got almost 3,000 people there. We had this massive meeting, and it was dramatic. People, as usual in any convention, a lot of times they didn't understand some of the details of the Roberts rules and the bylaws, but they knew why they were there. And, people told me they were crying. They were just feeling so empowered and really pumped up. And then we launched our legislated staffing ratios campaign, which is going to be our next step. So our goal now is to push for this campaign, but really to organize members, member by member, floor by floor, unit by unit, and let them know that this organization is not an organization that's going to do things for you, but it's an organization that's a tool for you to use. And in my hospital, where the nurses have been receiving my emails for 10 years, they're very clear. In fact, we in the slate, when we were in the chief, and they described us as a militant slate, some of the members of the committee got really nervous. They thought that sounded like, Arab terrorists or something, and they didn't like that word. And, I hung the article up in the bulletin board, and I asked the nurses at my hospital, and I said, well, what do you think of, they call us a militant. They said, oh, you've been saying that for 10 years. We know what that means. Just tell them what it means. So, and they kind of really led the convention. We had 400 nurses come, the big convention we had, and they were just really, really wonderful. They were just fantastic. They were really feeling empowered. So, I think the thing that we've learned is to keep the caucus alive. That's what you have to do. You can't, even if you win office, you have to keep your caucus alive. I think the mistakes we made before was we got so involved in being co-opted by the organization, doing all the work, and then just only ended up getting attacked because I think we didn't keep our caucus alive. And so we're really committed to doing that now, even though most of us are in positions of power. Somebody has to keep our feet to the fire and make sure we don't get corrupted like everybody tends to do. So we have to be able to do that. I think that's our big lesson. So I don't know. I could talk forever. So
Do.
I think that's the most important point. I mean, I could tell you some funny stories. I'll tell you one funny story. One of the things we had to do is to get people ready to strike. Was to get them involved in doing other activities that were intense, right? Because people, striking's a big deal, So we did a lot of things to attack the boss in my hospital, and one of the things, that was how I met Bernie. It was Bernie. Bernie's so talented. We found out that they were having this big gala affair at the Waldorf Astoria, a black tie affair. So Bernie made these cute little. This is when we didn't really have control of the union, so we made alternative posters too from our slate because we weren't sure that NYSNA would do a good job because usually they didn't, but that was before Bernie. So he made these cute little cards that look like gift cards that basically say, thank you for supporting our hospital. This is a big donor thing, right? However, the nurses, we worked very hard to provide quality care. We basically told them to write a check for the nursing staff, to get more staff. So we were at all the entrances of the Waldorf. We were all standing out there, and all these people are coming in these black ties and black dresses. And here we are, nurses, and we say, oh, welcome to Waldorf. We're so glad for your support. And, here's a card, and please support the nurses. The money doesn't really go. It goes for waterfalls and facades. We really need to go take care of the patients. So then they went upstairs and they told the CEO, oh, the nurses are greeting us downstairs. So they got really upset, and they sent security down to move us. And every time we move somewhere else. And then one of the security guards who was in a union, and 32BJ said, listen, they're putting gift boxes there for them. So we started putting all our cards in the gift boxes. So we distributed 1,000 of these, and the hospital went crazy. I mean, every time they did anything, we were in their face. They had another event where they opened something, and every time they used money for building funds, the nurses said, that's my raise, that's my pension, because they do this. So when they had an event at the opening of the garden, there we were handing out flyers again, and they got this security head I took care of him when he hurt his knee, so they got him to come. He says, oh, Judy, they're really upset. I said, Peter, we're really upset. We're upset too. He said, yeah, but Steve, the CEO, he's really mad. He wants me to call the police. I said, Peter, you know we have a right to do this. He says, I know, but I mean, what do you want me to tell him? I said, well, tell him we have a list here of every event for the next 2 months, and we're going to be there. And this leaflet that he doesn't like, this is nothing. That's what I want you to tell him. So the nurses, when they do these things, they felt, it's kind of a little racy and almost illegal, but not. So they really liked it, and they, it kind of revved them up. And then, of course, with all the mailings that the enemy sent, I mean, people were so pumped and so ready. But when management actually, just before we handed in the strike notice, caved in so much, that was when we knew we had a real problem, because people were willing to settle now. So we said, let's just push the envelope a little more, because that's what we do as activists, right? We always push the envelope a little more, and that's how we won. But people, unfortunately, after that, people go back to the same workplace, and that's why you have to address things on the shop floor. You have to address things on the unit, wherever you are. What really matters to people is how they get treated by their boss, what kind of work they do, what tools they're given to do their work, and things like that. That's what's really important, and that's what we found out. So those are the tasks ahead of us: getting people to fight back and giving them the tools to do it. That's it.
Judith has agreed to respond to questions. And just an introductory qualifying comment before we begin. Try not to do what Wayne Bear does, and that is to give a long introductory comment or speech before you ask your question, okay? So we get as many questions in as possible. And we'll let it go fairly informally, and Judith can recognize people on her own. But if anybody gets out of hand, I've got Captain Jack here, and he's got his blunderbuss and his sword, so that he'll get after me when it gets out of hand, okay? Is there a first question for Judith? In the back.
So, you've got other offices around the state, right? I think there's a local one, right? Somewhere in Latham, and you have other New York State Nurses Association satellite offices?
Yeah. We have our main office is in Latham. We have one in New York City. We just opened one for a unit in New Jersey and in Buffalo. We had some satellite offices that they closed. We actually would like to set up storefronts in a lot of different areas, because in the upstate regions, people are geographically really far apart. That's one of our goals. We have to figure out how to do that.
I've worked with NYSNA both as a community organizer, and also have tried to work with NYSNA as a person, as a staff of another union. And I have a bunch of questions, but I'll start with just one. I thought several years ago that there was a staffing ratio bill that NYSNA was pushing. When we were working, they were working as part of the New York State Healthcare Campaign. I thought they were working on such a bill.
Yeah, we had to argue with the practice department at that time to get the ratios bill on the table.
Okay.
And once we did, yes, the bill was written. We participated in putting stuff together, but it wasn't really. It's a really difficult bill to pass. It was part of the legislative program, but I think there was mostly lip service. If you want to really get something like that passed, you know how people make resolutions. What are they called? There's somebody who made a funny comment about that.
Resolutionary socialism or something like
Resolutionary, whatever. Resolutionaries. They're resolutionaries. I mean, you can make a resolution or put forward a bill, but if you don't put the muscle behind it, it's just paper. We're going to have to launch a campaign that's totally spirited and big and giant and
we
huge.
lobbied on that as the
Right.
New York State Healthcare Campaign.
Right.
We really did.
No, I know you did, but you're going to have to get nurses to go to every office. I mean, you want that passed.
You're saying they didn't mobilize you guys.
They don't.
okay.
They weren't capable. They didn't have the capacity to mobilize for very much, because people didn't believe in the organization, and they just were. They were never able to produce huge bodies anywhere. This is the first time we got thousands of nurses together.
Okay.
So you have to really organize from the grassroots to get stuff like that done. Nobody's going to pass a bill. I don't care how erudite you are in talking to the politicians. They got to see thousands of nurses coming to their doorsteps saying, I vote, I'm here, all the things you have to do to get a bill passed, because there's a lot of opposition to that.
So can I just ask a couple
Sure.
other questions with regard to this? Now, so I had really good experiences as a community organizer working with them in coalition during the late 80s and throughout the 90s, when they worked very closely with a lot of different coalition partners on expanding Medicaid, on
Right.
lots of good things.
Right.
Okay. And then I've had more recently not so good experience with NYSNA working on the Westchester Medical Center campus, where, you know, they don't know how to, like, they pay lip service to coalition, but they don't really know how to work together. It's all me first. And while nurses absolutely run hospitals and are essential to hospitals, so are the people who, like, run the IT department and clean the buildings and do all, and the biomedical people and all the aides who the nurses supervise, who all do all the shit work. And all the, you know, they're all essential to the hospital too, because them nurses are not going to be doing all that work. So I guess I'd like to know you, now that you've taken over, what is your perspective on working in coalition in both ways? Not only in legislative campaigns, but also when you're working with other unions at a hospital, what is your philosophy?
Well, personally, that's what we do where I am. I think in Westchester, the leadership there was part of the enemy camp and had a very different perspective. And there's a certain degree of bargaining unit autonomy, but there's also an organizational thrust. So that was supported there. I think that hopefully we can change that. Part of the executive committee was so partisan that when one of our board members went to support a picket, they said they'd have her removed by the police if she showed up at the picket. So it's a tough unit. But that's not all of them, just some of them. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of elitism there. At my hospital, we've always worked with the other unions. We supported the workers and the cemetery workers when they went out, and they came and supported us. And we had signs from... we code them, you load them. You know, we've always had other unions working with us. We always were able to get the rat from, like, a lot of people, because before we took over, NYSNA always sabotaged anything that we did at Montefiore, so we had to seek other resources. So we work with other unions. With 1199, it's a really difficult situation because of the nature of SEIU right now. But you know, I believe that, and many of us, our slate is very much into building coalitions, and there's no way we're going to win a staffing bill without doing that. And we're also very close to our community. Our community's always supported us at my hospital. We'd never have won the stuff we won without doing that kind of work. So certainly that's our philosophy, but you have to educate. You know, you can't shove stuff down people's throats either. You have to educate the population. We believe the rank and file is more in agreement with us than some of these leadership bodies that I think have been corrupted. So hopefully we'll see something there. That our next, after the Big Four campaign, we're doing the public sector stuff, because you know that it's illegal to strike, so they don't have the same leverage. And then they're negotiating with the government as well. Yeah.
Is there any plan for the Albany area hospitals, you know, Buffalo, the hospitals are union, New York, they're union. I don't know about Syracuse, Rochester, but Albany, you know, they vote the union down over and over again.
Albany Med.
Albany Med, St. Peter's.
St. Peter's.
Union. I worked at St. Peter's, and they were going to fire me anyway, so I was calling SEIU. I was on the phone at SEIU, but seriously, we have, outside of the public sector, we have very little unionization in our hospitals.
Yeah, I find that extraordinary.
Just,
I just met today with some Ellis Hospital leadership, some nurses there,
yeah,
and they were.
They have a nursing union, don't they?
They have NYSNA,
yeah,
but they don't have an agency shop there. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, but the Albany Med, St. Peter's.
Well, there have been 2 unsuccessful drives, from what I understand. Yeah. I just found that this is, by the way, this is a historic day. It's the first time a board member visited a hospital in the history of NYSNA and talked about union issues. I did that today. We were not allowed to do that before. So I just found out.
Which hospital?
Ellis.
Oh, okay.
I went to Ellis. I spoke with them, and we talked about, you know, union density, the lack of union density here. And I think one of our plans is in building the staffing ratios campaign. It'll be multi-union, broad, and hopefully nurses from facilities that aren't unionized will also be interested and get involved. And maybe then they'll decide they do want a union. I think that there's a lot of people that are anti-union because they haven't seen, you know, much done, and you know they have a point. So maybe they'll see that we have a different approach now, and I think it's very important. I think Albany Med's a challenge, as is St. Peter's, and I just learned about this stuff today. I had never been privy to any of that information. Well, but anything's possible. Yeah. But certainly it's something we'll have to look at. I mean, we're not going to change it overnight. Yeah.
Can you talk about advocating for
Louder, please.
patient health and safety as a part of the tool? Because I think there's a genuine wisdom explaining the work that we do
Patient health and safety.
as an organizing tool. In other words, safe staffing saves lives,
Yeah.
brings together.
Yeah. We have a lot of support in our. I should have to give you the YouTube address of our picket. I mean, we have a lot of support from our community because of the issues that we've organized around ER overcrowding. I don't know how bad it is up here. It's horrendous down in the city. In my emergency department, there's this much space between stretchers. We have an emergency department with 33 designated beds, and we'll have 200 people in the emergency room at one time. It's horrendous. Patients being admitted to the hallway, lying on gurneys as admissions, where they're collecting money for admissions. Working with 7, 8 patients when you really should be working 4 or 5. Covering, I've in the ER had 10, 11 patients covered, did a lunch coverage, 22 patients at once, sick people. I mean, it's scary. We've been to the community board, and we have, people are unhappy about it's horrible. It's disgusting how people are treated. There's no privacy. It's horrendous. So, that's something that we do talk about. It was in our hospital, staffing was a very big issue. And in many hospitals, a very big issue, and staffing is very directly related to how patients are cared for, and they're very conscious of it. In fact, sometimes if they don't know what's going on, they'll be mad the nurse isn't there, but I think when they look around the ER, it's easy. They see us crazy, running crazy. We're not sitting anywhere, and some patients cry, and they say, I'm so sorry you're working so hard. they feel sorry for us, so I think they see it much more than they used to. So, yeah, we've done a lot of organizing around that. I mean, the borough president of the Bronx wrote a letter to the hospital several years ago saying that he supported ratios after we testified down at the Bronx borough president office. We do testimony and stuff like that. So we do have community support. And the other thing, I don't know if I talked about this with the pension stuff. I talked about it here at dinner. I think it was at dinner. When you ask for bread and butter demands and you're in a privileged workforce, we make more money than our community. The Bronx is the poorest county, the poorest urban county in the country where I work, and we make a lot more money than our patients, and we have better benefits than they do. So how do you get community support when you're asking for something that people can't even dream about having right now? And our position was, and we really had to educate the nurses about this, not just educate them to say stuff to win people over, but educate them to say stuff that they had to believe and grasp onto, that everybody should have the right to health care without paying for it. Everybody should have the right to retire with dignity and have a pension and not have to live on cat food. Everybody should have the right to be treated with a certain amount of respect. And we are in a position to fight for it, and we're fighting for it for everybody. We can only fight for it legally for ourselves right now in the context of our contract, but it's something that we believe is a right for all people. And this is what the nurses at Montefiore will say and believe, and that's the kind of educational process. And we got a lot of community support for that. We felt that we were in a position to fight for things that other people caved in on, and that was something that people had to do. And I just want to say something. The Occupy Wall Street stuff, all that. So, some of us had gone down to that, and I found out about that human microphone. They call mic check. So at our lab, of course, the police always try to take away. We always bring megaphones and whatever. So we didn't have a megaphone. So I said, let's do the human microphone, and the nurses said, what's that? Because a lot of them didn't. So, we did it, and they loved it. I mean, I didn't realize how powerful, they felt like they were giving the speech. So, after that, the next time we had a march, one of the nurses said, let's do that human genome thing again. Let's do the human genome. They really had a good time doing it. And they said, we have to do that again. It was such a big hit, So, you're integrating new things all the time, and people get so excited about it, I thought it was great when I heard it, and, people had the same response. So, you just have to talk to people. You have to be able to talk to people more than 10 minutes. That's the trick, because people tend not to have that kind of attention span. But in terms of those kind of benefits and those kinds of issues, whether they're bread and butter or whether they're patient care related, you have to link them to the social compact. And we're trusted. We're powerful because we're a trusted group. People really trust us. And, we have their best interests at heart. Our biggest challenge is dealing with some of, I'm sure you all, looking around the room, I know you all have the same problem with young people. Getting young people more involved and invested in the whole struggle. And that's a big challenge. So we've really been trying to address that as well. And I don't agree with people saying that they're not interested. I think they are interested, and they are very passionate. I think it's just a matter of having them understand organization and struggle, as opposed to, they have the passion, but they don't know the history that we've had, many of us in this room, with struggle and winning things and losing things and the fight and collective activity. That's not something that they grew up with, but they have the passion. It's just a matter of getting people on board. And we have nurses that never did anything, that they saw what struggle was. I share a story. I had a group of nurses from the Philippines or from some Asian, they were very, very shy, and they had a manager who was the boss from hell, and she terrorized them terribly. And they had never been to a picket. I convinced them to come out. They came out to the picket. They had never chanted before. They never marched. They had never held a sign. And they were so pumped up. So they had, what we do is when we have our pickets, one group comes down for 15 minutes and the next group comes down. So they came downstairs and they were just fired up, and they went back up to the floor and they're still singing and they're saying, "We're fired up, not going to take it anymore." They're going back to the unit, and then there's the supervisor standing right there, and they stop, and the supervisor stops, and one of the nurses says, "What?" The supervisor goes like this, runs back in the room and locks the door. So they didn't let the next group in there. They'll come running down again. They said, "Judy." I said, "What happened?" They said, "I don't care if we don't win anything. I feel so good. She locked the door. She's scared of us." I said, "Well, go back upstairs. Let the other people come down." I don't remember what happened at the end of that, but it taught me something, that it's not just about the bread and butter issues. It's really about respect and the fact that people have no power and they feel so horrible all the time at work. And when they go out and they see a big group of people with them, it happened to us at our big convention that we just had, people feel their power. I mean, it may not be real. It may just be kind of almost illusory because it's just for a moment in time. But that is such a powerful, wonderful sentiment, and that's what we have to build on. And that's what happens. Yeah.
So, and first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
So, in some of your facilities, do you represent the supervising nurses as well as staff nurses?
In the public sector, because of the law, they're called supervisors, but they aren't statutory supervisors. They don't hire and fire. They're like head nurses. Or some of the lines, educators are in supervisory lines in the public sector, but they're not statutory supervisors. They don't hire and fire. So that's all we represent. In the private sector, we have no supervisors. So
in those instances where you do have supervisory nurses, what are the types of tensions that you see in representing them?
well, they're in the bargaining unit, and even in the facilities where we'll have head nurses who are not supervisors, that is the worst job in the world, to be in a union and to be in that position, because they really want to support the bargaining unit, but they're kind of like the buffer between management and the members. So, in fact, in my hospital, we're going to have a special meeting for the head nurse. They're called PCCs. We're going to have a special meeting for them to really talk about how to get around. I think we're going to title it How to Stay Away from the Kool-Aid. Because, sometimes they buy into it, and we have to give them skills to get around it, because they're really stuck in that, they're the buffers. And it's a real challenge. But there are not that many of them. And, we really try to work closely. We have some who are our best union delegates and some who are a real problem. We tell them, get a job in management, go away. Or the ones who are delegates, we figure out ways to support them and have the staff support them and look out for them. Because they get it from the manager when they don't, beat the workers. So, we have to support them. So it varies. It's really up to it's up to, we think we're going to try to address that population. And we just have the head nurses. In some of the places, they're a little higher up. But they don't hire and fire, and they can't effectively recommend. We've gone through the whole labor board definition with them.
And then I went to the NYSNA just had a lobby day about a month ago.
Yeah.
Here in Albany, and there were a lot of NYSNA nurses here in Albany.
In April, the one in April,
yeah, I don't
they
know.
were 80% students.
They were 80%
Yeah.
students.
That's something that we do. They do it for school. And that's another group we want to tap into. We haven't really tapped the student nurses in terms of the union that well. So they start jobs. They could be our colonizers, but we haven't really done that kind of work with them, and that's another thing we're really looking at.
Yeah, so I heard you mention 1199 and some of the issues of working in coalition with them, but what about some of the, and I'm a member of the Public Employees Federation, and the nursing title is one of our largest titles. I'm just wondering why we don't work more in coalition.
Well, we want to work in coalition with everybody, certainly around the staffing bill. I think when you work together around issues, it helps you build relationships, but also in the local. I was referring to in my local unit, 1199 is much more passive and much more into this labor management cooperation thing that we're not really into. But, we'll work like right now they're trying to, I think, get rid of the social workers and have the nurse the clinical nurse the clinical managers, what do they call them, CMCs, clinical management coordinators, the case managers take over their job. So we want to meet with the social workers. We're getting a little pushback from the union hierarchy, but we want to meet with them so we can fight management together. Nobody wants to take anyone's job. We just think they're trying to make everyone work harder and get rid of positions. So I think when you work locally, that works, and around bigger issues, you work, like legislative issues are a great way to work together in coalition. And we did that with mandatory overtime. So we want to build coalitions. I'm saying I'm not speaking for the whole board, I'm just a board member. But that's my view, and I think that's the view of some of the members of our caucus. But we don't have I should make it very clear, I'm not speaking here as a board representative. I'm a board member, but I'm speaking on my own. I really want to make that clear. The board didn't send me here to speak. I'm here on my own. Please understand that, yeah. Well, you didn't speak yet, then she goes.
People haven't.
Oh, yeah, do you want to copy? I'm not good at that.
Well,
Okay.
just for there'll probably enough time for people to come back to ask the question a second time, but let the people who haven't asked the question go first. Back here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you to actually expand on two issues that you kind of touched upon already. The first one being engaging younger nurses in your case, but younger workers in general, I guess, in the labor movement, and I guess what you see as the challenges and what your thoughts are on addressing them. And then secondly, about the connection between NYSNA and the labor movement more broadly and communities. One thing that I found really inspiring was when the nurses were involved in Occupy Wall Street, and Occupy Albany as well, actually here locally. That was one connection I saw. That's, you think about, the labor movement, sort of advertising itself, maybe on billboards or in radio ads, but, I really think that the connection happens when union members, are really connected to their communities, and that's to me the strongest link. So I guess I wanted to ask your thoughts on where you see, NYSNA possibly making those connections and the labor movement more broadly. So.
All right, the youth question. I think that's a challenge, because remember, we're kind of a privileged workforce. We're in demand, young nurses in particular, and as I age, I really see what age discrimination is. Older nurses really aren't going to be hired as many places as younger nurses are. And so once you're 40 or 50 and closer to retirement, you cost more, you have more experience, and you're less likely to be hired. Younger nurses, they get pissed off, they just go somewhere else. They say, well, I'll just go somewhere else and get a job. They don't have that much investment, so they'll leave. It's really hard. I think it takes about 7 or 8 years for somebody to sort of be stuck, which is kind of sad to call it that, but they get more invested because vacations by seniority. Once you, I didn't get a summer vacation for 10 years, So once you get summer vacation, you don't really want to leave because you're going to have the same problem somewhere else. But for the first few years, people will just move around. So it's really hard to keep people involved in the union when they see themselves as temporary. So that's the challenge, and what are you going to do about that? There's openings for people. But I think what we've been able to do is build up people's passion, particularly new grads who graduate from school and have all this kind of idealism. And they find they walk into hell, they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? Trying to bridge some of those gaps and, ensure that people don't bully new people, and be supportive to them. I've gotten a lot of young people involved because I've helped them develop skills to politely, tell people off, when they're being harassed. We do a lot of role playing that way. And also, having childcare. We don't have, this is a union of women, 90%, and we don't have childcare at our meetings. Having things like childcare, being sensitive to certain holidays, things like that. Having activities for children, where people, one of the problems, unions used to be social organizations. They're not. You have to have social events. Young people like social events. Part of one of our fundraising campaigns is going to be a party, a dance, dancing, music, and drinks or whatever. So doing things like that. So and addressing whatever issues come up. The communication thing, learning how to text. We got a lot of young people involved with that. Doing some internet stuff. Facebook. We had all that kind of stuff. So, and then the social issues. It's across the board. You have young people, different people, depending on their lives, care more about their communities. And you try to tap the people. Everyone doesn't, and that's how it is. But the people who do become our messengers, and we try to develop that. But everything we have to do is extracurricular. We don't really get paid for what we do, so it's very difficult to get people to put the time in. We try to do whatever we can, but it's very difficult. And nurses used to live very close to their workplaces. Now they don't. So when you don't live in your community, you go home. With the 12-hour shift, which was a big thing we fought for, the flexible schedule, 3-day week, it was great when you're raising your kids. It's horrible for organizing because people are tired. They don't come after work to a meeting, and they don't want to come when they're off. It really hurt unions. Yeah.
I was struck by your, in this era of economic contraction, where there's so much intimidation on one hand, apathy, and I think your word, powerlessness, how your story, and in this union agitation business for 30 years, has a great measure of hope in it, and what you were able to accomplish from a seemingly hopeless situation. In the sense, not only were you dealing with the all-powerful hierarchical management, so well connected to every aspect of city politics and economics, from hedge funds to Mayor Bloomberg, but also within the union itself, that over time erosion and eventually corrosion of the union spirit, and how you had to rebuild that is, I think, a story, extremely necessary to tell, whether it can be told in places like this, James Connolly did 100 years ago, going around trying to build a community sense of why labor had to be organized. I'm wondering, how we translate, because you look at Albany Med, intimidation, I know many people have gone there and they've been treated well as patients, but the union people will bring up the question of the union. There's an immediate, we can't talk about that, we don't want to go there, that sense of somehow the American Constitution stomps at the hospital door,
Right.
This idea of free speech and expressing yourself, the right to association is somehow vanished, And yet you've shown that you can light a fire. But I like, you have a realism about you. You understand, you light that fire on the picket line, you've got this group fired up, and you made that point about how do you sustain it on the shop floor in this section, in the daily routine, so that camaraderie, that solidarity, that strength, which overcomes the powerlessness, is not lost. And I imagine you have to rely on strong leaders, on floor leaders, and whatever you call it. Do you have a cadre of people that...
Historically, sustaining, that's been our weakness because we have no structure in the organization that really helped to sustain that. We've hired a lot of organizers now, and instead of doing external organizing, which has seemed to be the only organizing that unions like doing, I think we have to focus on internal organizing because, it's not just about paying dues and then getting the next group. It's really about having people have power, and you have to have training, and you have to be able to identify issues. Our latest thing that we're doing in my hospital, which is incredibly labor-intensive, meeting with nurses, discovering what their issues are, identifying leaders, meeting with management, laying out the issues, giving them a deadline, meeting again, and then having a plan on what you're going to do when they betray you. Because that's what we did. 2 walk on the buses. Can you imagine nurses doing that? 2 of them, and it was great, But you have to do more. Like we had a situation where what were they doing? They were denying lunches in the OR because they didn't have enough staff. Oh no, the schedule. They were changing the schedule after the schedule was posted. So I called the boss and I said, "You can't do that. It's a violation of the contract." She said, "Okay," but they didn't do anything about it. So the organizer we had went up there and he said, "Well, Judy said, they're not going to do it." "Well, they're still doing it." So he took 10 nurses and they went in and they knocked on they opened the door and there she was, and They said, we want this, what's up with the schedule? I'm doing it. And then the next week, another issue came up, and one of the nurses went in to ask about it, and she said, no, I'm working on it. That really unnerved. I don't know, I guess that'll get tired, but you have to do little different things, like whether it's, what do they call that, flash mob, right? We did that at one hospital, Brooklyn Hospital. All the nurses went out on their lunch hour and they started screaming for like 5 minutes, then went back in. By the time the guy came out, CEO came out, and like they were gone, like stuff like that, scaring them, letting them know a taste of what they have, what's yet to come. Because it's, you meet with them and nothing happens. That's the problem. So then people lose faith. So you have to figure out what to do. So we have to, and our members, our best ideas come from our members. Most of the things I talked about that we did all came from the members. You have a meeting, people come up with ideas,
And also, I like you made that point about, you know the community you're in the Bronx, you know the extent of poverty. You're not insensitive to it, but you're not apologizing for your effort for a decent salary.
Right.
I find that in working with teachers in small rurals, there's an awful lot of concessionary bargaining because they're hammered by the media and the community saying, well, look how much more you make than the average person in this particular part of upstate or western New York. So they get into a defeatist mentality of, instead of saying, like what you were saying, we've got to bring everybody up. We want good health benefits for everybody. We want a decent pension for everybody. Everybody's entitled to these things.
And you got to reframe the paradigm. Like I made a graphic. I found out that our CEO made $5-point-something million, right? So we figured out how many nurses you could hire for $5-point-something million. So I found this big fat cat picture from one of those old UE publications, and then I found these little pictures of nurses. So I copied like 54 nurses, and one CEO equals 54 nurses, and we put it all over the Bronx, And don't bug me for my pension. What about you? And then the doctors love that. Everybody in the hospital like this. You see this? You see this? Is that true? Yeah, it's true. And even looked like Bruce MacGyver, the head of the league. So yeah, I think you have to reframe the paradigm. The same thing in my union. We're being accused. The union people in my union, in my organization, are being accused of deprofessionalizing the association and making it quote unquote just a union. And I've said to the people who've told me that, I said, I'm a professional. I'm in a union and I'm a professional. I save lives every day. I make a difference in people's lives. I make things better for people. I practice the profession of nursing. How am I not a professional? How is everything that I do, everything I breathe, everything I think, even when I defend members and issues, it's all about the profession of nursing. I'm a professional. Being in a union does not make me any less professional. It doesn't make anything that we do less than professional. And I think that we just have to start rethinking how we allow ourselves to be defined by people who have power over us, and start redefining that and taking it back. I don't know. Do you have to call on people?
Over here, then Jonathan.
I work at Albany Med. I've been there about 15 years. I've also worked at St. Peter's about 5 years. We launched the vote about 10 years at Albany Med. It was really a vote on business unionism. There wasn't a vote on what you're talking about here. And straight up, a lot of people looked at it as, do you want to pay dues to, they showed us the film, the pictures of, do you want to pay dues to the guys, the head punchers of the unions playing golf down in Florida and stuff like that. And unfortunately, we lost, and by a very slim margin, but we will have another chance, and I'm very optimistic about hearing from what you're talking about. But that's what has to happen. You talk about the young people and stuff like that. People don't like wasting their time. Especially now, nowadays, the way the economy is and stuff like that. You don't want to waste your time. You want to bang your head up against the wall for no reason. And you don't want to walk around with a target on your back for no reason, or just run your mouth and suffer the consequences. So, it's serious business. What you have to present is when I talk to young people and stuff like that, it's like, they're angry. They want to maybe do something or this or that. You have to kind of know who to fight, and you have to know how to fight too. So it's kind of like what you're presenting to me is really very helpful in trying to figure out how we go about doing that. And the hospital's done different things that just in terms of we've hired a lot of the hospital's hired a lot of Filipino nurses at Albany, which is an interesting situation there. But it's people talk about how factories go overseas and stuff like that. Big corporations here will bring in other workers to work, you know, when they can get away with it and do it. But right down the line, I've had just about every Filipino worker that I work with, they've said, Mike, we get a union vote away. I'm 100%. From the history that they've had, they're, you know, it's for the hospitals, they don't, you know, that's not a solution at all. But one of the things, you mentioned safe staffing. How, just a practical matter, I don't see how it works on the floor sometimes. When we're short, we're short. I mean, we have some float nurses that can come in and help, but there's times when we run, I mean, you know, generally you don't get a break, you don't get your lunch, and stuff like that, but when we have high acuity, it's just tough. I mean, it gets tough on the patients, it's tough on us. How have you accomplished that, and how is that kind of like put into practice? Because we don't, we have a real small float pool. Like when things get tough, we can get maybe an extra nurse to help us, but you have call-ins, you know, we'll call everybody to come and help us, but you know, a lot of times you're left to just fend for your, you know, try to get through your shift.
Well, you know, the hospital can get away with murder if they don't have to pay a fine and they violate the law. That's why we're pushing for the legislation. And we have negotiated ratios in our contract that they violate, so we have a couple of strategies, but there's nothing like money. You know, to negotiate in a contract that the hospital will pay you for them not get, you know, they have to agree to negotiate that. They won't do that. So all they do is they say, oh yeah, yeah, we didn't give you 7. Oh, yeah, wow, you won the grievance. Sorry. You know, what does that do for you? Same thing used to happen with mandatory overtime. Oh, we shouldn't have mandated you. Well, it was really rough. That, you know, I mean, nothing happens to them, so you have to get some kind of teeth to fight back. But at the same time, we have other tactics that we use, like, do you get paid when you miss your breaks there? Do they pay you? No. So what we do, we've used everything the employer has used against them. Like, they instituted this biometrics punching in system. We had to put our finger in a thing. We never had even signed in before. So we were really opposed to it because we thought it was an invasion of privacy. And, you know, I know in Puerto Rico when they did it, they put nail polish and took care of them. But we didn't do that. So we ended up with these punching in things, right? And then punching out, right? So what happened was, because it's a wage and hours issue, when people were leaving an hour and a half late, they were getting paid overtime, right? They never were paid before, so so then they started saying, well, you have to punch out, you have to leave on time, you know, we can't have you, you know, generating all this overtime. So we said, well, you know, let's do the math. You should only take care of 5 patients. When you take care of 7, let's add that up. Probably about 7 or 8, 9 hours, you're going to have to pay overtime for people to finish their work. Let's talk about the solution. Give us better staffing. They said, well, no, people have to be more organized, whatever. And then they started pressuring people and bullying people. Well, you have to punch out and then finish your notes, right? So we said, we think that's illegal. You know, we don't think people should be doing that. And, well, they have to finish their work on time. So we told the nurses, we kind of did this role play. We said, this is what you say. You say, okay, so I'm writing my chart. I'm going to use your name on this chart and say, as per Miss Adams, I cannot finish this document because I must leave. And, of course, you know, they didn't want that. So now people get paid overtime, and they say, well, we're going to discipline people for leaving late. I said, let me at you. You know, come on. I want to be the one at that hearing. You know, I really want to be there. And they haven't been able to do that. They're really giving people a hard time for coming in late, which doesn't bother us too much because we hated that people came in late anyway. You know, union person. But, you know, because it hurts your colleagues. But, you know, we fought them on that. And we have protest forms that we file, which don't mean a whole lot now, but we're going to use them in our campaign. You know, and we've made a big fuss. And when they say to us, well, when we have shortage, they say, well, your colleagues are calling in sick. Talk to your colleagues. I said, let me get this straight. I come to work. I wasn't sick today. My patient's in the bed. I'm going to tell the patient I can't take care of you well because my colleague called in sick. Is that what you want me to do? What do I say to the patient who I can't take care of? Well, that's not what we want you to say. Well, you tell me what you want me to do. Same thing with being disciplined for, you know, now they're hard on people for calling in sick, right? Who are really sick. So, you know, I know about the 7 just causes and all this, so you sit down with them at the hearing, and they say, well, you've been sick 4 times, you know, and you're being disciplined. And I say, well, what did you have that day? Well, I had a fever. I said, okay, I just want to write down you're sick. Miss Adams is saying that when you have a fever, you should come to, don't write that. Well, what do you want me to write? Well, no, well, what about the next time? Well, I had the flu. Okay, you wanted her to come to work, and we go through this. I said, so tell me, what are we doing here? Well, we run a business, and we have to have people show up to work at the business. I said, you run a business, and your demographic is 90% female, taking care of kids, having female issues, having babies, taking care of parents, getting sick, working this. Where's your business plan? You run a bit. Who's in charge? You harass them. I mean, that's what we try to train our delegates to do, to harass them, push the envelope. Don't let them define you and what reality is. Reality is people get sick. And of course, people who malinger, I tell them, cut it out on the side. I don't defend bad practice. I give people a right for due process, but I have a social obligation as well. It's a big responsibility. You're protecting the patients as well. And that's the kind of unionist I am. I mean, I don't let somebody get run over, but I try to say, let's help this person. And then I say to them on the side, work at Macy's, don't do this. But, it's a challenge doing this kind of work. But I refuse to let them run over people with nonsense. And so everything we've done, even with the uniforms, they made us wear uniforms one color. We used to wear these pretty little uniforms. Then they said, no, everyone has to wear the same white. So we fought against the white. We got blue. We got to vote for blue. So everyone was upset about it. But it's great because when I hand out flyers, I know who to hand flyers to now. If I don't know everybody, all the blue people, So whatever they do, you use it against them.
Maybe two more questions, Jonathan, and then way in the back.
Yeah, in terms of the safe staffing, for us who are not in the hospital industry, who would like to, be able to explain to people why safe staffing is important? How would you do that in a paragraph or, briefly, so that we go out of here knowing what you consider safe staffing, what exists now, and what needs to be done?
I don't know. It's kind of like, do people understand class size? It's the same thing, for teachers. There's a limited number of people that you can take care of properly and safely. Imagine your nurse having to do something for you that requires an hour's work. Imagine her having 17 other patients. She can't give you that hour. It's kind of like, do the math. People in the hospital are really sick now. People are going home being suctioned by their family members. Nobody stays in the hospital unless they're half dead, and they need a lot of care. And I'm not even just talking about what we call frills. When I started in nursing, I was able to talk to people who are afraid of dying. I have to say, I'll be back. You can't help people in a humane way. So if you want humanitarian, competent care where somebody's really going to be able to reflect on what's wrong with you if something goes wrong, you have to give them the tools to do it, and you have to give them enough time to do it. And anyone who's been in the hospital knows, you want your pain medication, you want someone to come there right away. You don't want them to be busy with 4 other people before they get to you. I've never passed people by before. Now I do it all the time. It's a horrible thing when somebody's saying, nurse, and you just pretend you don't hear them because you're doing 5 other things. And that's the kind of situation that we're in. And that's outrageous.
Well, is there a numerical number that you feel is safe or not safe?
Depending on the unit, our bill describes numbers based on various units. There's a lot of hybrid units, so it's a little complicated, but we're talking about the floor, not the ceiling. At least you have to have this many nurses for this many patients. If they're sicker, you have to have more. But we've tried to come up with numbers, some kind of formula with numbers based on studies of what's safe, given kind of an average level of illness. And that's what we've come up with. We wish we didn't have to do it, but if we don't do it, then then the sky's the limit.
The more nurses per patient, the safer the hospital. The studies show it's like a no-brainer, straight line graph. The more nurses, the safer. It's not the more parking places out there, the bigger the bed tower, the more widgets, the more telemachines. It's more nurses. Nurses make the difference in making a hospital a safe place. And so, and it shouldn't seem like, it seems like common sense, but actually there are now a raft of scientific studies that show that the more nurses, the safer the hospital. The better the outcomes, the lower the morbidity, the lower mortality.
Right. There's actually people who've described deaths. Like for every fewer nurse in a surgical unit, 20 more people die. There's so many statistics about it. It only makes sense.
The last question, and before we adjourn, we're going to give Jonathan an opportunity to maybe make an announcement about the upcoming speakers that he's aware of that may be coming here. And that last comment came from those you don't know, for the new president of the Physician Nationals Health Plan that knows a lot about the nurses and problems with nurses and doctors not having good nurses.
Put it that way.
Well, I meant the problem in hospitals that are not using nurses. Andy's been a big champion of nursing. I know that.
What is the nature of organizations' relationship with nurses who work at such organizations as health insurance companies?
I really don't know how to answer that because I guess there's a whole lot of different people that do different things. I mean, we had that problem when we started with the case managers that we had. I mean, their job was supposed to probably be it was not a nice job, and we really tried to support people to protect patients. So the case managers that we have in our hospital at Montefiore are patient advocates. I know that's not the case in some of the places where they're not unionized. And in health insurance companies, I'm not sure I guess people answer to their own conscience, whatever they do. I mean, I think most of the health professional agencies are designed to deny care or not pay, or not deny care but not pay. I've had to fight them myself, and that's what happens. I don't know what to say about that. I kind of think of them as mercenaries in some ways, But I can't make that. I don't know what people do behind closed doors. There's been a lot of whistleblowers as well that have come out and exposed them. So.
So we're going to bring this formally to an end after Jonathan makes his announcement, but just for those people that came in late, just a reminder that Judy is a working nurse. She's not a paid union official, and so that she's doing this on her day off, and so she's been on her feet quite a bit lately too, so we want to not keep her too much longer. But she may be around for a couple of minutes, after we formally end. Somebody has a real pressing question, they have an opportunity. She may try to get it answered.
We know you're in there.